The galactic core first spotted Earth through a fringe relay deep in the Orion Arm, a small blue world spinning quietly in the dark, a planet that had burned itself nearly to ash more than once, and yet had risen again each time. Wiser, louder, more determined, they watched the transmissions with mild curiosity, at first ancient signals bouncing through the void full of music and laughter, and arguments over trivial things full of art that made no sense, and stories that somehow did. They sent a diplomatic vessel expecting tribal chaos or primitive awe. Instead, they found humans waiting on the landing pads with welcome signs in dozens of alien tongues they should not have known. The first ambassador was stunned by their eagerness, not to conquer, not to convert, but to connect. Humans were unlike any species the core had encountered before, not because of their technology, which was patchwork and unrefined, not because of their biology, which was fragile and inconsistent, but because of their eyes always looking outward, always searching for something more. A people who had turned war into memory and suffering into poetry. They offered food to beings without mouths, laughter to species without humor, and peace to those who had never known the word. For a decade, humans sent emissaries to the stars, wide-eyed and grinning hands, always extended palms, always open. They shared their knowledge, and their cities, their culture, and their chaos, their songs, translated into sonic frequencies that made crystalline beings weep. Their games adapted into simulations that confused even the machine minds of Zedros. Their art painted on metal canvas, displayed in the clouds of Varelen, where color was a language and shape a screen. They made friends easily and enemies never, or so they believed. The galaxy learned of them quickly and labeled them quaint, enthusiastic dreamers with clever minds and kind hearts, but soft, so very soft, a people who had not needed war for over a century, who settled disputes with votes and compromise, who mourned the loss of strangers, and believed every problem could be solved with conversation or compassion. They were studied, observed, quietly dismissed as idealistic and harmless. Some admired their optimism, others envied their creativity, but most simply smiled at the humans, like one would at a child trying to explain a dream. In time, Earth was welcomed into the core, not as a power, not as a threat, but as a novelty. They were given token seats on minor councils, granted access to trade and education and transit lanes, and they were grateful, so grateful, too grateful. Many thought, always eager to help, to build, to heal. Humans became mediators, facilitators, diplomats, the galaxy's gentle bridge between cultures too proud to talk to one another. And it worked too well, because no one feared them, no one truly respected them either, and no one, not even the humans themselves, believed that they could ever become something else. Until the day something was taken that they could not forgive, and in the moment the galaxy made that mistake, the quiet warmth of humanity began to shift, not into fire, not into fury, but into something far more terrifying, a cold, slow awakening, like a storm held just beneath the surface, waiting not to destroy, but to remind the stars what lives in silence when kindness runs dry. It started with a treaty, a seemingly minor adjustment to trade protocols, a clause buried beneath legal jargon, written in a language even their best diplomats found difficult to translate. But they signed it, of course. They always signed with trust and smiles and warm hands. They wanted to be part of the stars and believed that goodwill was the strongest currency in the galaxy. Soon after came the fleets, not with weapons drawn but in ceremonial formations. The ships arrived over the skies of Earth, shining like polished promises, cloaked in diplomacy and justified presence. They were peacekeepers, they said, here to ensure stability and proper integration. Enforcement ships were deployed around orbital stations, cloaked in the language of safety and order. Human leadership questioned, but not too loudly. They wrote polite protests and scheduled meetings. They requested clarification and received long, carefully worded responses that said little and promised less. The councils they had trusted were silent or indifferent, and those few alien allies who whispered concern did so only behind closed doors. The first real change was in education. Galactic curriculum imposed over human systems, lessons, rewritten histories, redacted and softened. Children taught not what Earth had endured, but what it had been gifted by the core. Then came the economic mandates, factories repurposed for off-world quotas, shipping lanes diverted, industries sold or shuttered, all in the name of unity and efficiency. And still humans complied, trying to find compromise where none was offered, trying to reason with a hand that only tightened its grip. Their art was regulated, their communications monitored, their networks filtered and streamlined, until Earth itself felt more like a client state than a partner in the stars. They were told this was progress. They were told this was structure. They were told this was peace. Cities changed not suddenly, but subtly. Cultural centers replaced with core administrative hubs, monuments to shared destiny erected where old human statues once stood. Drones patrolled not to protect, but to watch, and the language of kindness became a leash wrapped slowly around the throat of a species that still believed cooperation could cure anything. When a senator from Lagos stood up in a core hearing and accused the council of exploitation, her voice was deleted from the official record. When a protest in New Santiago demanded sovereignty, it was rebranded as civil disruption, and its leaders vanished without trial. When a family on Luna refused to surrender their land to core mining interests, their dome suffered a mysterious systems failure that no one investigated and no one mentioned. But through it all, humanity did not rise, not yet. Instead, they watched, they recorded, they remembered, they learned, and they changed in ways the core could not see, because they believed they had broken humanity by chaining its gentleness, by silencing its compassion. They believed they had killed the human fire, but they had only scattered the coals into the wind. And in hidden bunkers beneath the Antarctic ice, in quiet servers buried under mountain cities, in old satellites drifting in the void, eyes were opening again. Old plans were being dusted off, and old voices, long silent, were being heard once more, not shouting, not yet, but whispering. Not yet, but soon. The galaxy watched as Earth grew quiet, not just silent, but eerily still, a stillness that did not come from peace, but from something deeper, something harder to name. It was not submission, not defeat. It was the silence of cities holding their breath, of people walking with eyes open, but voices closed, of a species learning to listen when talking no longer mattered. Some species pitied them, some laughed, but most simply moved on. They had seen it before. After all, new species rose and fell, empires bloomed and withered. Idealism was a candle in a hurricane, and humanity, they thought, had simply been blown out. But that was only what they saw on the surface. What they did not see were the hands moving beneath the waves, the quiet alliances forming between human enclaves across the stars, the scattered fragments of Earth's diaspora whispering to one another through encrypted bursts and coded songs hidden in static. They did not see the children being taught not just core law, but Earth history, the real history, not the redacted versions filled with pacified lies. They did not see the blueprints being redrawn in dark rooms, or the servers humming in deep ocean bunkers where no core signal could reach. And somewhere in the ruins of a library that once held every human story, a data crystal was found with a message engraved in a language the core had never bothered to learn. We are not asleep, we are counting. The core dismissed it, a meaningless relic of a people too romantic to survive. They saw no ships being built, no armies being raised, no calls to arms, no mass unrest, only the slow, compliant silence of a people they believed had finally understood their place. But others knew better. A few old traders who had walked Earth's streets before the occupation, a handful of diplomats who remembered the look in human eyes when their skies first darkened. They tried to warn the council, tried to speak of the storm gathering under the surface, but they were ignored or silenced or quietly reassigned. Because the core did not believe in storms, and still the humans waited. They waited as more governors were assigned to oversee compliance, as more resources were extracted, as more laws were passed without consultation, as more pieces of their identity were carved away with surgical precision. They waited and watched and documented everything. Every name, every face, every order given, every cruel hand that reached too far, every station that stripped another piece of Earth's soul was marked, cataloged, stored in servers so well hidden not even the council's finest AI could detect them. And all the while the humans kept smiling in public forums and trade halls. They kept shaking hands and taking notes. They kept offering soft words and softer resistance, and the core believed that the fire was gone. But deep beneath the crust of Mars, where once a failed colony had been buried in red dust, a voice crackled to life on an old frequency, one that had not been used in 100 years. and all it said was ready. It began with a broadcast that should not have been possible. A Core's secure channel hijacked mid-transmission during a summit watched by trillions across 1,000 systems, suddenly filled with images not filtered, not edited, not deniable images of children working in off-world labor camps wearing torn uniforms, marked with the Core seal images of protesters beaten in the streets of what used to be Paris, images of cities stripped of color, voices silenced with technology, faces twisted in pain and grief and rage. And then it ended with one phrase in human tongue translated into every known language across the stars. We asked nicely. The summit erupted, the Core stumbled, the galaxy leaned forward as if the stars themselves had inhaled, and then the first disappearance was reported. Auxiliary Admiral gone from his locked quarters with no signs of forced entry, only a single human coin left on his bed, a relic no one understood, but everyone remembered. Within days, 3 more vanished, 2 governors, and 1 high-ranking enforcer, each from a different system, each taken without alarms or traces, all replaced by symbols ancient and simple, a handprint, a flame, a feather, a fist. Then came the sabotage. A dreadnought's engine destabilized while docked at Europa Station, its failsafes bypassed by code so old the Core systems didn't even recognize it. Another ship turned against its own fleet, its weapon systems activated in perfect silence, striking with surgical precision before vanishing into the void. The Core called them terrorists, called them extremists, called them anything but what they truly were: humans. Not the soft diplomats or the starry-eyed artists the Core had known, but something older, something buried, something born from centuries of fire and ice, from war and loss and defiance, something the Core had forgotten could live inside kindness. Because kindness was a choice and choices could change. They struck in patterns no AI could predict, cells scattered across worlds, people who had never worn uniforms, operating with coordination that felt impossible, hitting logistics, not civilians, targeting infrastructure, not populations, always with precision, never with chaos, always with silence, never with spectacle. Every act left a mark, not a message, not a demand, just symbols carved into steel or burned into data nodes or flashed for a second on a public screen. The Core tried to fight back, but their systems were compromised, their networks infiltrated from within. They tried to call on allies, but those allies were afraid not of human weapons, but of human memory, afraid of what they had allowed, afraid of what might come next. In the corridors of power, the Core argued, shouted, panicked, but out in the stars, station lights flickered and supply lines failed, and somewhere in the dark, a human voice spoke through an old relay, calm and clear. You took our world, so we built another one beneath yours. Then silence again, not surrender, not pause, silence like the moment before thunder. And the Core finally began to understand. They had not been conquered by humans. They had woken them up. They came not as an army, not in ships lined with banners, or marching through gates with flags raised high. They came in shadows, in silence, in perfect timing, from 1,000 places at once, and yet somehow as if from a single mind. They came from the cold places, the forgotten places, the places no one ever bothered to watch, because they believed humanity had nothing left to give. But humanity had been busy. The engineers who once built habitats now crafted weapons from mining lasers, precision instruments of destruction that made no sound. The coders who once wrote games now bent systems like rivers, tracing weaknesses in ancient Core architecture. The artists who once painted beauty now sculpted symbols into metal walls, messages to their own people, to hold steady, to strike fast, to remember. It was not a rebellion, not a war, not even a movement. It was something older than all of that, something forged in every corner of human history and hidden deep in every story they had ever told. Each strike was measured, each attack strategic, no wasted effort, no misplaced anger, no innocent touched, only the systems, only the chains. Orbital trade collapsed not in explosions, but in silence. Freight ships rerouted by hacked coordinates, docks locked shut, with passcodes no one remembered, giving financial records, scrambled, encrypted, rewritten. Entire sectors froze while the Core tried to trace the source. But they could not, because the source was everywhere. A scientist on Saturn who vanished with a Core databank and appeared a week later on a broadcast revealing evidence of 20 years of human resource theft. A pilot above Proxima who locked her cargo bay with 7 core officers inside, then ejected the flight deck and disappeared into a wormhole. A janitor on a moon colony who placed a single device beneath a central node and walked away as the lights went out across the planet. And always the symbols left behind, not graffiti, not threats, just reminders. One was fire etched into glass, so it never cracked. Another was ice carved with bare hands into the wall of a core transport. And one more was simply the word remember in 100 human dialects, spoken by voices no one had heard in generations. The galaxy began to fear not humanity, but its capability, its patience, its precision. Because war, they understood war, they could fight. But this was something else. This was intellect sharpened by grief and discipline, fueled by stolen peace. This was revenge done not in rage, but in resolution. On Earth, the streets were quiet, still monitored, still under watch, but no longer bowed. Instead, they moved with intent, coordinated, unseen, a colony of minds connected by purpose. And in the core halls, the council finally said what they had not dared to speak. We do not know what they want. Because humans had made no demands, sent no lists, offered no negotiation. Because humans were not fighting for something. They were fighting to take everything back. The core expected an ultimatum, expected threats or conditions, or perhaps surrender dressed in diplomacy. But none came because the humans were no longer speaking, not to the core, not to the galaxy, not even to each other out loud. Everything was movement, signal, code, rhythm, patterns, spoken in the old languages of action and consequence. The final strike did not come with fire or blood. It came with exposure. Every document, every cover-up, every secret file, locked behind the highest tiers of core security, was released at once across every public channel in the galaxy. Not doctored, not edited, just opened with quiet finality files, showing the forced relocation of millions of humans to off-world labor zones, records of entire villages, sterilized by experimental core tech. Photos of core officers, smiling as monuments to human history, were dismantled in front of silent crowds. The galaxy did not speak for 3 days. And then came the breaking. Core allies pulled back. Core citizens protested in the streets of their own world. Species that once laughed at the humans now whispered in fear, because humans had shown them the mirror, and what stared back was not humanity but themselves, and they did not like what they saw. The core tried to regroup, tried to broadcast apologies, statements of misunderstanding, cultural clashes, diplomatic errors. It was all just a miscommunication, they said, a period of adjustment, a bump in the road of integration. But no one listened, because humanity was no longer in the room they had already moved on. By the time the core fleets mobilized to retake Earth, they found every relay station disabled, every backdoor closed, every tracking node burned clean, the entire Sol system gone dark, not with failure but with intention. And then Earth spoke, not in words, but in light. Satellites turned outward, broadcasting the simple signal on every band across every language. You knew the humans who sang, the ones who built, the ones who welcome. Now you will meet the humans who endure, the ones who learn, the ones who never forget. And the stars went quiet. No new attacks came, no further strikes, no demands, no war, just silence and absence, and watching, because the humans had already won, not through conquest, not through fear, but through truth and patience, and an unbreakable will wrapped in soft words and smiles too long mistaken for surrender. They had not become monsters. They had become something worse. They had become necessary. Across the galaxy, core facilities, once untouched, were dismantled without violence by their own workers. Planets once loyal held referendums and declared independence. Governors once proud now begged for asylum on neutral worlds, and the humans did not respond, did not interfere, because they did not need to. Their silence was now enough. And far away on Earth, behind the new ski shield, deep in a place where stars looked close enough to touch, a child sat in a classroom listening to a teacher speak, not of war, but of choices of peace, and what it costs, and when it must be defended. And carved into the wall behind her, in every tongue that had ever tried to rewrite the human story, were the words, "We are still here."